we are the people who we're looking for. It's us. There's no one else coming. We have to be the ones who are going to step up into those positions of leadership instead of just counting on other people to fill that. It's us. If we don't, who else is? And so I would just encourage people to remember to take the initiative, go be your best self, be who you are, be that well, and thrive because of who you are, not despite it and not for what other people tell you you're supposed to be.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Well, I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Danica Roem. Danica is a stepmom, a heavy metal vocalist, a vegetarian, an award-winning journalist, and best-selling author. But she is best known as the United States' first openly transgender state legislator. First, but no longer only, I should add. In 2017, Danica was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates, defeating an incumbent who proudly called himself Virginia's chief homophobe. While many doubted her ability to win, she was elected and then re-elected twice more. Danica is now a candidate for Virginia's state senate. I'm really excited to dive into her career and her strategies as a chief influencer. Danica, congratulations on being recognized by the Communications Board as a chief influencer, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's great to see you.
You too. I wanted to start by asking, we believe some of the most effective leaders are more than chief executives. They are chief influencers. As a journalist turned elected official, can you tell us, who do you have to influence to achieve the impact that you want to see in the world?
Well, first, I need to be influenced by, and I need to then summarily re-influence my constituents. That is number one, which is that I have to know what's important to them and then execute the issues that are important to them. So, from a lifetime of living here in Western Prince William County, from being a reporter here for 9 years, 2 months and 2 weeks from 2006 to 2015, and from the last 6 years having served this area, as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, I've got a really good understanding of what it is, that are, very important issues on a macro level throughout Western Prince William, as well as the two cities of Manassas and Spark. But when it comes to the micro, I'm not going to know every single thing about every single one of the 101,000 people I represent. That's literally impossible. So how do you get to know what's really going to be important like that, right? Well, you got to go knock doors and you got to go listen and you got to go talk to people and you got to go out. And when you hear them, for example, when I was first running for office in 2017, I didn't know that reforming the adult guardianship system in Virginia was going to become one of my chief issues that I end up working on, in the House of Delegates. But because one of my constituents talked to me about an issue that was very personal to her that would result in her sister dying due to, terrible care or lack thereof. I would even argue intentionally malicious care, that I want to go do something about it. And so in that case, the influence to me was, here's why you should care about this issue. And I was influenced on it because I have a set of values about protecting the most vulnerable people. And there is no form of person who is more vulnerable in society than incapacitated adults. Incapacitated adults don't have access to their rights. Someone else controls that for them. And so they are always at the mercy of other people making right decisions for them. And I want to go do something about it. So all 3 terms I've been in office, I have filed legislation about reforming the adult guardianship system. And This year, we finally got a lot of that done. We got major reforms done where we're requiring guardians to now have to actually visit their wards 3 times a year, once in person or virtual, once in person or virtual or by a designee. And I wanted 4 in-person visits. We had to compromise to get where we were, but it's a step, right? And one of the other bills that we did with this ended up allowing family members to have more rights to visit their loved ones who are incapacitated, and there's a whole thing that goes with that. And we also made sure that we had equal lengths of terms on the basically adult guardianship advisory board that deals with this in the first place, so that there's a lot more consistency there. But long and short of it is, it wasn't just me doing this. I also managed to influence a number of my colleagues to carry similar, or to carry legislation on the same topic. And the reason that's important is because my legislative portfolio can't just be one topic. I can't just have, like 15 bills on this one thing. I've got to have help from other colleagues because look, reforming the, adult guardianship system in Virginia, that doesn't just affect, people in Western Prince William and Manassas Park. It affects people all throughout Virginia. And so you need to have a lot of different voices, a lot of different experiences. And so when Jackie Glass won her special election the night before we were all sworn in 2022, I gave her one of my bills to carry for reforming the guardianship system, and she got it passed. It was one of her first bills to get passed, which was awesome. And Delegate Sally Hudson, she got a bill passed, on this topic, and we've had other bills passed from other members on this topic in the last few years too. All of this is really important, and it was nothing that I brought to the table when I launched my campaign in 2017, but I was influenced by my constituents to do it. And since then, I've, influenced my colleagues to support this legislation through battling for it for 6 years. And I've influenced my colleagues to carry legislation about this as well, because it's also important for them. So, and, I've had a good partner with Senator Jeremy Pike in this as well, too, by the way. So just long and short of everything is, influence is more of a roundabout than a two-way street. There's a lot of different angles in which people can kind of come at it, and at some point you're all just going to kind of meet in that middle right there, right? And hopefully when you are doing this job and you do it well, everyone works in good faith, then you have a predictable way to get on the other side and be a better legislator for it. If people don't work in good faith, though, then the influence that they have on you is actually negative in terms of their own reputation. And so they can have a bad influence on you in terms of your perception about them. I know that's a lot to digest, but it's really important to act in good faith this way, that the influence that you choose to exert and that you choose to be influenced by, is coming from a good place. But if it's not coming from a good place and someone tries to influence you to do the wrong thing, people are going to catch on.
I love how you used roundabout, a traffic transportation analogy, because when you first ran for office in 2017, obviously there was a major national, regional, local narrative about your candidacy and eventual win making history. But when you were focused locally on connecting with your constituents, you really focused on a lot of local issues like I think it was Route 28 in particular. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of the messaging, discipline, and the focus that you had when you ran your first race?
Sure. So, when I was asked to run for office, the year before, I knew immediately what I would campaign on, which was fixing Route 28. It was because of my mom's commute. My mom by the time my mom retired, she spent 40 years driving up and down Route 28 to get from our home in Manassas to get to her job near Dulles International Airport. And I remember being in school and at 6th grade at All Saints Catholic School in Manassas, wait until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night for my mom to come pick me up. Sometimes because, she was battling it out on 28. And, my predecessor had been in office since I was 7 years old. And by the time I ran for office, nothing had changed about Route 28 since the mid 1980s. between Yorkshire and Centerville. And so I ran to go change it. And now, as I speak right now, I voted for the construction when I was a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. I voted for the construction that's underway right now in Centerville for the multimodal 6 laning that's happening. I also secured $24.5 million, $24.47 million from the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program, and another $330,000 from RSTP funds, Regional Surface Transportation Project funds, and program funds. And that money is going to go to implementing my innovative design intersection designs study that we did, my STAR study, for a series of R cuts, which are restricted crossing U-turns, a raised median, and 1.75 miles of contiguous sidewalks. People have an alternative to having to drive 28 in the first place. And that will be between Manassas Park and Yorkshire. Now, I nerd out knowing fully well that your audience did not tune in for a in-depth discussion about, modern roundabouts and like we're going to have over in Rollins Ford Road, we're going to get $8.9 million for between Gainesville and Bristow. And nor did they tune in for innovative intersection design talk on, 28. But I mentioned all of that because I took my real life experience, my mom's commute, and I've driven that road hundreds, if not thousands of times, just probably thousands of times at this point in my life. I've been driving for 23 years now. I was on 28 today. That's just part of life for being here. And so I wanted to really kind of emphasize with this of having that lived experience. It was just like, I was positive that if I went door to door and talked to people about 28, everyone would have a Route 28 horror story. And they did. And so, what I also heard was, Danica, don't run on transportation as your top issue because voters are too jaded about it in Northern Virginia to want to believe that anyone's going to actually do anything. I said, and that's exactly why I should be running on it. That's exactly why I should be prioritizing this, because every other politician right now, it seems like, is kicking the can on this and trying to, blame someone else or say it was someone else's, job. And my predecessor proved me right in the 2017 campaign when he had a sign that said supervisors, not slogans, fix Route 28, where he was trying to assign responsibility to the Prince William Board of County Supervisors for it. And I called BS. And I said, no, this is a state maintained road. And yes, the county can help. At the same time, this is your job. This is your job. You are the state delegate for this area. Your job. You've been in office for 26 years. You care more about where I go to the bathroom than how your constituents get to work. You need to be fired and be replaced by someone who's going to prioritize this. And well, my constituents agreed. And so here I am, and now running for state senate and got a pretty good shot this fall, so everything goes well. And, we're going to just continue focusing like a laser on fixing Route 28. That's what we're doing.
So I loved your book, Burn the Page. It is such a high energy and entertaining memoir about your life and your experience. And I actually listened to it, which I'm so glad I did because you narrate it. And so that humor and style really comes through. One of the themes of the book and really of your life story is own your own narrative. Don't let others control your story, that it's yours. I think a lot of leaders really struggle to embrace the authenticity of who they are. They might try to show up as different people in different places. And you talk a lot about that. I wonder if you could share about your own journey and the lessons that you've learned, and how that might inform your leadership style, which obviously has resonated with so many people, not just locally, but, around the world.
Sure. So, when I wrote Burn the Page in the first place, I really wanted to get that narrative out of, casting fires to stories you don't want to be in anymore. And one of the best ways to do that is to tell your story. It's not like you have to write the most salacious thing in the world. I always say like drama queens have a place, and it's on RuPaul's Drag Race. They do not belong, in every other, aspect of society here, where you're just like, oh my God, look what a mess I am. It's like, no, you don't need that. But in terms of, okay, what are other people going to use against you? What are the stories about, who you are, where you've come from, where you've made mistakes, you've been flawed, you've got things that you're not necessarily that proud of. Well, I would rather be the one who's telling that story than having other people tell it. People try to this day still try to do that with me. I'm like, all right, it's, it is what it is. I just accept it and I acknowledge it and move on. And what I think other leaders, or in this case, other influencers could have here, for your audience, is having is enough is if you have enough comfortability and confidence to be able to tell your story, you're going to be able to influence other people to want to do the same for themselves in only the way they can. And that's one of the crucial parts about this, is remembering that we all share one thing in common, which is a first person perspective. And so anything else about your life is going to be based on observation. It is not going to be based on lived experience. You uniquely have that lived experience because you know what was going on in your head in those moments, assuming that you can remember those moments, of course. Some moments are more clear than others. See my 20s, which I wrote about rather in depth in Burn the Page. It's very blunt and honest about using alcohol as a security blanket. For a good part of my 20s. I was never an alcoholic, but I was definitely a social drinker, and I was a party drinker at that. And so you're front heavy metal bands for 12 years, and you lead a band that you style as Drunk Thrash. Well, that's going to happen, right? So, I was upfront and honest, like, yeah, these are stories of my life. Put it out there, and at the same time, my constituents to date, they're like, you know what? I might not be able to relate with every part of your story here, but I do relate with your honesty. I do relate with your authenticity. And I'm sure I will be seeing a ton of mailers and TV ads or digital ads or whatever else used against me later this year, based entirely on the book or other things. Okay, election day is 20 weeks from today. Is what it is. I just accept it. I'm like, okay, well, while you all talk about that, that's fine. I will go and talk about fixing roads and feeding kids.
I think your approach there, obviously, you've been inspirational to a number of folks in the LGBTQ community who see, wow, they've been told you can't be who you are and be a leader or get elected, and you've proven them wrong. But I think it's also inspirational for any leader, for someone to say, people told me I couldn't be who I was and get here. And guess what? I did it. I proved them wrong. You mentioned in your book the 13th district. It's not exactly West Hollywood. I mean, we're talking suburban Virginia, and you found a way to connect with your community. And not everybody agrees with you on every single issue, but that doesn't mean that they don't put their faith in you. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think there's such a leadership lesson there for anyone, no matter whether they're running for office or they're running a business.
So the first part here is that people just made a bunch of wild assumptions who don't live here. It is always so charming to me when I hear people from way outside the district who have never stepped foot in Manassas, Mass Park, Haymarket, or Gainesville try to opine about what it is that my constituents want or need, where it's just like, y'all, until you've spent a day having your soul sucked out of you on I-66, I don't want to hear it. Like, until you've had a day where you have hit your head on the steering wheel because Route 28 is backed up at 2:30 in the afternoon, and you're just like, oh my God, I'm just trying to pick up my kid to go home. I don't need to hear it. One of the other, I hear a lot of stupid things from people who don't live here. Oh my God, Danica Roem is going to have such a hard time relating to Latino and Hispanic constituents in such a heavily Latino and Hispanic area because she doesn't speak Spanish and because she's transgender and they're socially conservative and blah, blah, blah. They'll say that stuff. I'm like, okay, have you ever spent a day knocking doors with me in my heavily Latino Hispanic neighborhoods and talking to people about their commute and talking to people about Medicaid expansion and talking to people about making sure that we are fully funding our schools and making sure that we are raising teacher pay and making sure that we're taking care of their day-to-day quality of life issues, and that I voted to do a lot of things that are entirely in line with my constituents' values. And then, oh my God, you're now assuming that all of them are going to just be transphobic bigots because, oh, Jesus, how are they ever going to relate to the trans woman? And it's just like, because I had a conversation with them at their door and they're like, okay, cool. You're from here. So am I. Neat. Or, hey, you're from here. Great. I just moved here. What should I need to know about getting around here? Like, well, I got a bunch of restaurant recommendations if you want one. It's just like politics, just like journalism. Politics is a people business. You get out there and you communicate. It's what you do. I spent 10 and a half years in newsrooms writing news stories, but most of my time I did not spend in the newsroom. I spent out in the field. Just that's the other thing that's important is go out there and just talk to people. People are people. And look, I've got a certain number of my voters are Republican voters, by the way, and I can prove it in the data. In 2021, when all three Democrats lost statewide, they lost 2 precincts in my district on election day itself. This excludes early voting. That I won. I won Tyler precinct and I won the 2nd precinct of Manassas Park when the Democrats top of the ticket all lost. How come I, as transgender delegate, was able to outrun 3 straight people at the top of the ticket? And it's just like, because my constituents know who I am. I'm plugged in. I sat at Haymarket Town Council meetings for 9 years, bored out of my skull until they exploded at each other and cussed each other out and stuff. And I got to write about it on the front page of the newspaper. Like, like I know every inch of Washington Street in the town of Haymarket, even though it's a half-hour drive from where I live. It's like, well, I have spent so much time in every aspect of, all 18 of my current precincts and throughout in the state Senate district I'm running for, all throughout the city of Manassas Park, and Western Prince William in general. I'm not coming across new turf. I'm not coming across somewhere where it's like, geez, I don't know what I'm going to talk about here in Northern Haymarket today, in Northern Gainesville and Catarpin. What are people going to possibly want to hear from me? This is all going to be new. I better use just standard issue stuff. No, I'm going to talk about the same stuff I talk about every other. Like, I know the communities already. I've lived here my entire life. And so they're one thing that I think for your audience in terms of being influencers, remember to go with your gut, a well-informed gut, but just like, what do you think people want to talk to you about? And it's just like the things that are important to you, right? So for me, hey, raising the standard deduction, that's a great thing to talk about. It affects a lot of people. Or maybe if I'm in Manassas, I'll talk about raising the earned income tax credit, making that more refundable. It helps out a lot of people. When you talk, I have never heard at the doors someone who has criticized me for my vote for expanding Medicaid, even if they live in the most wealthy McMansion parts of my district. Not a single one of those people has ever told me, Danica, I'm so disappointed that you voted to make sure other people have health insurance. That never happens. And so it's just like, you know what? Be yourself as you go do this. Trust your instincts on this to some extent, and just make sure that they're well informed. And that's my instincts come from, you spend the better part of a decade covering the news in your lifelong home community. Chances are you start figuring out what's important to people.
I love that line. Trust your gut, but the caveat, well-informed gut.
Yeah, trust your well-informed gut. Yep, make sure you drink a lot of kombucha. Good for your gut.
Yeah, because you're out there. I just loved reading about like knocking doors and leaving the personal notes and that focus. I was so interested in your background in heavy metal and how that really inspired you. And one of the stories that you told was about Metallica and how they connect with fans after their concerts. Can you just share that? Because that was an anecdote that really stuck with me. And then it seemed to, obviously it's something that influenced you as you thought about how to connect with
constituents. Yeah, it's funny is that I got asked about this once by Joe Garofoli at the San Francisco Chronicle, who asked me because Metallica is from the Bay Area, and so he actually asked me about this before. So yeah, I'm happy to relay that. So yeah, so one of the things to talk about in Burn the Page, when I was in high school, there was a Behind the Music episode on VH1 about Metallica, and one of the things that I remember did basically like this PR person from Elektra Records was talking about was, it doesn't matter how tired they are, after a show, if there's still kids out there's still people out there who want an autograph, they'll sign every autograph, they'll take every picture, blah, 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 that whole thing, right? And that work ethic is something I wanted to bring into politics with me. And so that I remember my first year in office when I was still super cool for like a year. And then it's like, yeah, those 15 minutes expire real fast. And so, back then I would have, I would do a lot of public speaking and have people lined up for like 2 hours afterwards to talk to me. And especially at my alma mater at St. Bonaventure, that had that happen. I had that happen out west. And here in the district, people don't need to have 2 hours of waiting in line because like I'll go to your house. Like I do a lot of house calls here. So it's just like if you're my constituent, yeah, just call me. I'll come over. That's cool. So I remember just in one case, I had gone out west after my 2017 campaign was over, and I had a really long rope line, talked to a lot of people. And this one guy, he was an older fella, he was sitting down, talked to my campaign manager, and he extended his two hands out toward me. And I just talked to a whole lot of people, and I'm gonna make time for this one more person, right? Sure, no problem. He's he couldn't get up into the line, or I didn't think he could get up, it turns out. But he was shaking his hands out toward me. And so I went out to shake his hand. He clasped his hands around mine and he goes, "These hands touched Harvey's." He's talking about Harvey Milks. And he told me these stories where we started walking through the Castro, and he pointed to a hill down the street and he said, during the height of the AIDS crisis, he's like, "My friends were dying right here on the street. They were 25 years old, looking like they were 85. And it was so surreal listening to him describe how like half the people that he knew at one point were dying or right in this area, and why he wanted to share that with me, and why that was important to him is, even though I'm definitely a different person than who Harvey Milk was. And, Harvey certainly had his flaws too, by the way. Let's not sugarcoat that. But I do want to say that like the basic message of coming out, the message of the power of influence in this case, where when you are out, you are encouraging other people to live authentically as well, because they're seeing your representation, they're seeing your example, and they can say, "Hey, if Danica can do this, so can I," right? That message is something that's really important. And he saw a continuation of that message to me, decades after Harvey's assassination. And, this is not going to be something where I'm going to, put my head on my ass and be like, "Oh, I'm the second coming of Art Milk" or something. No, I'm myself. And part of that is just recognizing that someone was so moved that he wanted to share a story about that. And in a way, you talk to your LGBTQ elders and they're like, "Just remember on your worst days here, how hard it was to even get to this place," right? For me to be in a position of viability, this damn well was impossible 10 years ago. I know that. I'm well aware of that. This absolutely would have been unheard of 20 years ago, and I would have probably been assaulted 30 years ago.
You talked a lot about how to influence your, constituents and the public, and how that starts with letting them influence you, to what's important to them, and listening, and those skills you learned as a reporter. Something else that I'm really interested in is how you've been able to find ways to work with other elected officials across the aisle who you might not agree with on a lot of stuff. You shared in the book that, your mom is really conservative, and you had a point of view about how you find ways to have common ground with people you don't agree with on everything, and also how you even travel to the districts of some of the Republican legislators you're trying to work with. Can you talk about that style of how you influence those that you need to cooperate with, and what you've learned from your first term to now, you're in your third term? Because again, I think there are a lot of lessons for leaders who have to influence other leaders as part of their work.
So when you know what it's like to be the only person like you in every room that you enter, you have to show a lot of grace to people who either do have good intentions but don't express them well, or have malicious intent. and they don't like what you represent. They don't like you. They don't think that your values align with theirs. And at the same time, there's going to be, of the thousands of bills that come up, there's going to be things that you agree on. And so you have to remember, bill to bill to bill to bill, that, hey, this person who I don't agree with today, I might need their vote on something else another time, right? And you're going to have to initiate these conversations. I've absolutely got people in the Virginia General Assembly who, we'll just put it this way: if I won my next election and they didn't, I wouldn't lose any sleep. It's just fine. You know, that's fine. You know, I've also got people who I really, really, really hope come back, you know, this next year, because I have phenomenal working relationships with them on both sides of the aisle, by the way. You know, like, got plenty of that. It's like, sure, would I love to see 140 Democrats, you know, in the General Assembly? Sure, of course. Those days are long gone. The Democratic Party used to have that sort of dominance in Virginia, and, you know, the much more when they were the conservative Democrat states, the Dixiecrat states. Those days are long gone. So in the modern day here, you've got to find the grace within yourself to be able to have a conversation with someone who, you know, disagrees with you on things that are very important to you. It doesn't mean you stop fighting. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up for your values. It doesn't mean that when you were working on compromises on some things that you're going to compromise your integrity. No, it means you got to be a good legislator. You know, what's so funny is the movie Lincoln was shot in the Virginia House of Delegates chamber. A lot of people don't know that, by the way. So it's really funny because Tommy Lee Jones's character, I remember watching that because I had not seen that before I was in office, and I was watching that, and I texted my colleague Delegate Dawn Adams, and I said, "Dawn, he sits in your seat on the House floor," and she's like, "Yeah, I know, isn't that so cool?" But one of the things that you really take away from that movie that is based on real life is that people forget that when they really over the top glorify Abraham Lincoln as this, you know, large in life, you know, person, he was a politician at the end of the day, right? He was a deal maker. He still had to figure out, how do you work with people who disagree with you? How do you bring them into the fold to get them to agree on something that's still really important? And that was one of the things I thought was so interesting with that portrayal, was basically the idea of, like, hey, look, even these people who were absolutely, you know, in the American zeitgeist for exemplary leadership and all the things that come with it. It's like, yeah, peel that onion back, and then you find out, oh, right, remember, he was elected. He had to run for office. He had to do all these things to try to appeal to the most number of people and stay true to himself while trying to do that, right? And you're like, oh, hey, some of that's relatable. And at the same time, you get there and you want to do something that is, you know, fundamentally going to alter the course of world history in terms of the abolition of slavery. How do you get there with the votes to get the constitutional amendment in the first place, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people from the other party? There's a lot of deal making you got to do, right? There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of ways you got to talk about it. And this gets into the sausage making part of legislation, right? Where it's like, no one likes to see a sausage being made, and no one likes to see how legislation is made. But it doesn't always have to be. Maybe the best way to put it is, when I got there, by default, the process was not as inherently terrible, awful as you might think it is most of the time. Sometimes, and this happened this year, and I'll even call it out, the bill that we all voted, all but one of us voted for, which was, we would call it the Dominion bill, which was basically to restore a lot of oversight, you know, government oversight and such. Oh my God, the legislative process that produced this bill was a heaping pile of garbage that produced a decent bill. I hated the process for that. I, behind the scenes, fumed about the process for it. And when it came time to vote for it, I had to ask myself, what's the greater good? Is the greater good going to be to hit the no button out of a protest for a process that I think was completely, utterly anti-transparent, that was the definition of backroom deals. That was everything else that I thought was disgusting about politics? Or do I look at the text and the words that are on the paper after this process has come forward, and I am voting on the text that it comes before us? That's a decision I had to make, right? And sometimes this is going to be one of those where you can try to take the highest of moral high grounds and realize that if you get this vote wrong, that it's going to do more damage than good for people. Or you can vote the other way and realize that the process that produced this is antithetical to a lot of things that you stand for, quite frankly, but the product itself is what's on the board. When you go to hit that green light or red light, or you hit that request to speak button, you got to remember that you're looking up and you are here to talk about something that is going to that the words in front of you are what will directly affect the people you represent. Whereas the process that produced those words is something that you can reform long-term within the legislative process, but it's not going to affect the day-to-day lives of people who you represent because it's done. It's over. You now have a product that's been produced for you. Here it is.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of leadership on this, there comes a point in this line of work where you go, I can be really frustrated at a lot of things, and I have to always remember what's the greatest good. Sometimes a bad process produces bad bills, and you should call out all of that stuff and then vote no. Absolutely. Sometimes a bad process produces a mediocre bill where you're like, I'm going to vote no on this today because this should be better. My constituents deserve better than this. Okay, if that's what happens. But here, let me tell you another one. Last year, we had a vote on on repealing the grocery tax. Grocery tax is inherently regressive, no question. Inherently regressive tax, would be happy to repeal it. And yet, a portion of the grocery tax was dedicated to transportation. Specifically, 53% of it was dedicated towards maintenance for transportation. We're talking about $190 million over 2 years. At a time where we had, in 2022, we would have more than 1,000 people die on Virginia roadways. In 2021, we had 968 people die on Virginia roadways. And from the grocery tax, they're talking about making the localities whole. They're going to, supplant some of the funding that they were otherwise going to be losing from this. They were talking about making sure education was whole. Okay, but how about transportation? Oh, well, we have transportation surplus. We're going to use this transportation surplus to cover this. Bull. There is no such thing as a transportation surplus when we have $47 billion of outstanding demand just in the 9 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia alone. You cannot possibly say this. And at a time where you all haven't fixed the very freaking roads that are killing my constituents right now after I've been yelling hard and screaming about this for years. And so what ended up happening is I stood on the House floor and I asked, did you all make transportation funding whole? No, because we have transportation surplus. If you have transportation surplus, how come Rollins Ford Road isn't fixed? How come Route 28 isn't fixed? Oh, well, then there is no transportation surplus. I railed on this, threw a royal epic fit on the House floor on that bill and on a bill that would have temporarily repealed the gas tax, which would have been a disaster for Virginia in terms of making sure that our roads are well maintained and keeping people safe. It would have been like the return, you're talking about like $11 return but that would otherwise cost people, probably get people killed, like more people killed than who are already getting killed. I threw a epic fit about these. And when it came to on that one vote on the grocery tax, knowing fully well that they were going to gut $190 million from transportation funding, and my constituents sent me to Richmond to get more transportation funding, that was antithetical to my values, even though the result would have been, hey, getting rid of the grocery tax sounds good. I am the only legislator from either party in either chamber who voted against it repeatedly because I will not defund transportation, period. I won't do it. Not to the tune of 9 digits. Absolutely not. It goes against my values. That was a hard vote to cast. I'm going to get hit in the face this year over the next 20 weeks because of that vote. I know that's coming. I am well aware that I am playing with fire on a bill that was going to pass no matter what I chose to do. It was so against my conscience. I could not, in good faith, and look at myself in the mirror and say, I did the best job for my constituents and I did the best job for the Commonwealth because I voted to defund transportation. Get out. Absolutely not. And so sometimes you have to take that hard vote, if for no other reason than to know that you did the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah.
And so I showed you between those two bills, one where you got to make a compromise in terms of like, ugh, this process is terrible, but the end result is okay, versus the process is terrible. And actually, in that case, the process wasn't the problem. In that case, the argument for the process was the problem, because they were arguing something that was fundamentally not true, which is a supposed transportation surplus. You can, if you underfund transportation and then magically you have more tax receipts coming in, you go, oh, there's a surplus. That's because you're not spending enough on transportation projects to begin with. So yeah, surprise with. So I hope these examples, of nothing else, show you that you've got to consider a lot of this stuff, issue to issue. And at the same time, you do have to pick your battles. And I picked my battle. The battle that I picked on the Dominion bill was to sort of fit about it behind the scenes. And then when the time came, and I saw that it did more good than harm, I voted for it. And then on the grocery tax one, where it is against every ounce of my being to defund transportation, I'm willing to take the hit on it, because there's not a chance in hell that I think that, we should have less money for fixing our roads, bridges, pedestrian paths, bicycling lanes, everything else that we need. And so, I know I did the right thing for the right reason.
In addition to those examples of kind of legislative battles, you've, had a lot of success at getting bills, passed and signed, and you've cooperated across the aisle. I just want to ask you, kind of taking a step back, I think a lot of leaders really struggle with, imposter syndrome. I think the imposter syndrome can be the enemy of influence, because if you don't believe you can have influence, it's hard to exert it. And when I think about your story, you were working 2 jobs. You were working at Afghan Kebab House and as a journalist at the same time. While you were doing that, you were advocating for changes to policy at the school district. Then you're touring on a shoestring budget in Scotland with.
That was a couple of years before, but yeah,
and
that was a different time that I had 2 full-time jobs, but yes.
I mean, and so, whether it's when you have those 2 full-time jobs or whether it's when you're, performing with Cab Ride Home, it strikes me, you didn't imagine yourself battling out legislation the way you are and influencing public policy, or having the national recognition that you have, and, being invited by celebrities to come to events. How did you talk about the imposter syndrome a little bit? I don't remember if you use those words exactly, but you even kind of had a joke about overcoming your inner Ralph Wiggum. And so can you share a little bit about the lessons that you've learned in overcoming those doubts? Because I think no matter what industry a leader is in, everybody's run into that. And that can really keep you from having the influence you want to have and making the impact you want to see.
So I would say more so than imposter syndrome for me, it was doubts, right? It's doubts of, can I win? That's the first thing, is, can I win? Because all the policy things you want to accomplish as a legislator, they don't mean anything if you don't win. If you can be the advocate, you can do all that other stuff, but you wouldn't be running for office if that was the end goal. You're running for office to win an election, and so you can go and serve people. That's the point. And so that's the first one, is, can I win? And then once you get there, can I get my bill passed? Can I get this done? And that's those are questions where, yeah, you can have a lot of doubts when you're first, when you're the first person who's like you there. Because when I found myself in the minority party my first 2 years, they weren't inclined to do me any favors. They killed all my bills my first year. They put me on the kill list, just straight up, just like, nope, we don't want you. We don't want you to be here. So we're not going to do you any favors. And, I worked my way off the kill list, like we talked about earlier, by, visiting Republicans in their districts and, really, working my bills hard in off session. But what I found was some of my colleagues have told me directly that they have imposter syndrome over it. And I have to remind them of their qualifications, why they're there, and that they are there because tens of thousands of people in some of their cases voted to put them there because they thought that they belonged. And, I remember when I got to the hotline, for our national journal in December 2009, here I am coming from, St. Bonaventure University, 3 years removed. I'm coming from, just reporting for my local weekly newspaper. And I'm applying for a job against hundreds of other people where my colleagues at the hotline, some of them had gone to Harvard, some of them had worked on statewide campaigns, presidential campaigns, whatever. Some of them had been these like incredible reporters and stuff. And here's me coming from a high school girls gymnastics meet, and covering like a wine tasting one day, and then town council another day, or general assembly, or even Congress stuff. And I was just like, holy crap, how the hell did I get here? I was not a particularly good student. I made the dean's list 2 out of 8 semesters when I was in college. And the last time I had been on the honor roll was 3rd grade. It's not like, it's like, how did I get here? It's like, well, remember from that time that you were in college and you would read about politics 2 hours a day, every single day, 7 days a week. And you did that for, say at that point, 5-6 years in a row, every day. That's why you're here, because you took such an interest in this and you read up on it and you do know a lot about this. And yeah, when you apply yourself, you damn fool, you're actually a good reporter, but you have to apply yourself. That's part of it. And then fast forward 8 years later, running for office, it's just like, yeah, when you apply yourself, when you actually go out and knock doors, when you actually go and make those phone calls, when you actually put yourself in front of other people, you're good at this. But you have to go and do it. Get off your ass and go out and knock some doors today. Get off your ass and go, make some phone calls. Or hell, you can be seated for that part if you want to, but I'm also a pacer. When I'm on the phone, I like to walk. So like just like lots of pent-up energy. So, I think part of this, just to put the wrap around it, is the doubts I had were about taking the initiative and consistently doing it every day like clockwork to make sure that I was doing the things I needed to do to win. And I'll tell you, in that first campaign, and I write about this in the book. So I kicked off that campaign in a 92 Dodge Shadow that was worth $324 at the time. I bought it for $700 in 2012. It's colored with primer blue. It was in primer and blue. It had more rust than paint. And that car had, since 2012, bid it. I kicked off my campaign January 3rd of 2017. The car was dead by February. So I replaced with a $1,500 98 Toyota Camry. That car bid it by April. And it's just like, oh man, primaries in June. What am I going to do? I'm not raising enough money to be able to afford a rental car right now. Or at least not until the next blue check comes in. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh my God. And so I did the only thing I could do. Got on my bike and I started knocking doors in my home precinct in the woods, mind you, where it's zoned SR 1 to 5. So you're talking 1 to 5 acre, lots, and there's no sidewalks, sidewalks in Yates Ford. That means that you are hustling. And when you're looking for Democratic primary voters, sometimes you got to go half mile between doors. And I did bike for 2 days. That chafed. And so then I just walked. I walked for 6 days out in the woods, dirt roads, off of dirt roads, looking to go knock on doors. And one little thing I could afford for $3 over at CVS is a little stack of 4x6 pieces of paper. And you just rip it off the top. And I would leave a personalized handwritten note every single door I went to with my personal cell phone number. 6 years later, I've won 3 campaigns. Today is primary day in Virginia. I don't have a primary opponent, so a Democratic nominee. I still do that to this day. 6 years later, I still write that note, whether I'm knocking doors in Bull Run Mobile Home Community Park, basically trailer park. I'll leave the exact same note over there that I leave out in the previously mentioned McMansions, or the townhouses, or the 2/2s, or the single family house, or the townhouse, or the apartments, or the condos. I don't care. I'll talk to everyone the same way. Everyone gets the same amount of dignity. And that, what I got out of that hustle, I won my home precinct in a 4-way primary where I was being outspent by tens of thousands of dollars by 2 different candidates. I was being outmailed 2 to 1. I won my home precinct by more than 20 points, 54.5% of the vote. And then my next door, my other home precinct that was the top of my street, one side is one precinct, the other side is the other precinct, you know, and quarter-mile walk from my house to the top of the precinct, at least when I was living there. And I won the other precinct with like 53% of the vote.
Hmm.
And in a 4-week primary, that's 20+ point victories. You know what I mean? That happened because I willed it into existence. I was not going to let, you know, this problem prevent me from winning and from doing what I need to do. And when, you know, one of the best pieces of advice I got from the 2015 Democratic nominee for the 13th district, he told me, there's never been a candidate who won election day, who lost an election and said, I wish I knocked fewer doors.
Right. That's great. I mean, the hustle comes through, and it came through in the book. With our time, I just want to ask you one last question. You've been talking a lot about the in-person interaction with your constituents and with your peers in the legislature. On social media, I think a lot of leaders have a love-hate relationship with social media because, you know, it can be time-consuming. It can attract critics and trolls, but at the same time, it can be used to connect and inspire others really efficiently and at scale. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about your own approach to social media.
My approach to social media, few things. So the first thing I'll say on this is when you go to my Twitter page, I'm at PWC Danica. Right now, the top 2 things that you'll see on there is me talking about trains and talking about feeding kids. Turns out the transportation school lunch lady is all about feeding roads, feeding kids, or fixing roads, feeding kids. We've passed 41 of my bills into law, all with bipartisan support, including 12 feet under kids. And I talked about, you know, the money secured for fixing Round Road, Route 28 earlier, big advocate for expanding mass transit. And you know why? When you got, you know, 95,700 Twitter followers, you're talking about where people can go find free school meals or free summer meals today at Garfield High School in Woodbridge, and now it's going to come over to Unity Reed High School in Manassas next week. And you know, why expanding Amtrak service east to west, you know, from Roanoke is good for the rest of Virginia because it actually takes more traffic off of I-81, which will then take more traffic off 66, 95, blah, blah. I write about that because 2 things. Number one, a good number of those people who follow me are going to be my constituents. And so it's just an easy way to communicate with them. And then for people who are outside of the district, you know what they do? They look at this and you're like, man, I wish my legislator talked about this because my legislator is just like talking about like Trump-based conspiracy stuff or, you know, stupid crap. And they're not just telling you about what's going on at home today and dealing with those like day-to-day real life issues. And look, on my social media, I got a sense of humor too. You know, I try to put that out there. You know, I talk about my love of heavy metal. I talk about, you know, other stuff that makes me a person. But I try to really spend a lot of the time that I write, you know, I use a lot more either neutrality or uplifting style of communication than I do negative. Not that I don't do negative, I certainly do. Just as you know, sometimes negative things happen and you gotta get pissed about it. You know, that's part of the deal, right? It's part of being human. And so yeah, you know, I certainly communicate that as well. And you know, I make sure that what I do with my Twitter page especially is I communicate to my constituents, number one, and by communicating well to my constituents, I'm telling this, you know, this national audience that I have, hey, you followed me. Chances are you followed me not for my stance about why we need to replace cast iron water pipes with ductile iron pipes, even though we do. Chances are water infrastructure isn't the reason that you were following my my page. You might be following me because I'm trans. That's a good lot of people, right? And yeah, you're following me as I'm trans. And I'm a trans legislator, which means I'm going to talk a lot about legislative stuff, about my district, about policy things. And I'm going to talk about trans things here and there as well. Because, hey, my constituents, some of them are also trans, which means that it's constituent service. Quality is constituent service. You know, that's why supporting LGBTQ, you know, constituents is part of the job as far as I'm concerned. So what I would tell other people about social media with this is just to make sure, number one, you're using your authentic voice. And if communicating is hard for you, that's okay. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Just make sure that whoever is running your social media is able to capture your voice and that it's consistent with the message that you would bring to the doors. It's consistent with the message that you would bring in whatever chamber of public service that you're in.
Love that. Danica Roem, we are so happy that you joined us today for Chief Influencer. Whether folks are Democrats or Republicans or even pay attention to politics at all, I hope that they will read your book, and I hope they will pay attention to you and take away some of the great lessons that you shared with us today about influence, starting with letting your constituents or the people around you influence you. And I love that you said, go with your gut, but a well-informed gut. That's such an important part of overcoming doubt, of overcoming imposter syndrome, if folks deal with that, and influencing others to achieve the impact that you want in your communities and the world, whether that's improving the infrastructure of transportation like Route 28, or making sure that other folks who are part of the LGBTQ community know that they can overcome the naysayers and they too
And,
can stand
and
up.
the last thing to leave you all with, remember, there's no white knight coming down Route 28 on horseback ready to save the day. We are the people we're looking for. It's like, it's us. There's no one else coming. We have to be the ones who are going to step up into those positions of leadership instead of just counting on other people to fill that. It's us. If we don't, who else is? And so I would just encourage people to remember to take the initiative, go be your best self, be who you are, be that well, and thrive because of who you are, not despite it and not for what other people tell you you're supposed to be.
Powerful message to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so kindly.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.